He never said, "I love you," not once in 30 years. But every Sunday at 6 a.m., without being asked, he made menudo. You sat down. You ate. Neither of you said a word. You both understood everything. Mexican parents feel everything deeply. They notice everything. They remember everything. Almost none of them ever learned how to say it out loud, so they went to the kitchen instead. Today, 25 things they were actually saying every single time they fed you. Number 1. Menudo on Sunday morning. He didn't sleep in on Sundays. You did. By the time you opened your eyes and the house started to feel like the day was beginning, the tripe had already been simmering for 2 hours. The broth was deep red from the dried ancos and guajillos he had toasted the night before, because he thought about Sunday on Saturday. The hominy was perfectly soft. The lime was already cut. The oregano was already on the table. Everything was ready before you were even awake. You never asked him to do this. He never explained why he did it. There was no conversation about it, no agreement, no routine that anyone named out loud. It just happened every Sunday for years, without fail. What he was saying, what that bowl of menudo said every single week was this: I know the week was hard. I know you carry things you don't tell me about. I am not going to ask you to explain yourself, and I am not going to make you perform being okay. I am going to wake up before you, and I am going to make the thing that takes the most effort, so that when you come downstairs on the one morning you don't have to be anywhere, you understand without a single word that someone was thinking about you before you even opened your eyes. That was the whole conversation, every Sunday, for years. Number 2. Tamales at Christmas, that took 3 days to make. She didn't have to make them herself. She could have bought them. There was a woman 2 streets over who made excellent tamales every December and sold them by the dozen, and nobody would have known the difference. But she didn't buy them. She made them. Every year, without exception, she made them herself. It started days before Christmas. The masa soaking, the chiles roasting until the kitchen filled with a smell that had no equivalent anywhere else in the world. The lard being worked in slowly, by hand, until the masa was exactly the right consistency, and she tested it by dropping a small ball into a glass of water, and if it floated, it was ready. And if it didn't, she kept going. Then, the spreading. Then, the filling. Then, the wrapping. Hundreds of them, one by one, each one folded with the same care as the first. Then the steaming, hours of it, the whole house thick with it. She did all of this slowly, and she insisted that everyone in the house participate, because that was the point. The tamales were not the gift. Anyone can buy tamales. The 3 days were the gift. The 3 days of her choosing to spend the most important hours of her December making something that would disappear from the table in less than an hour because the hour mattered that much to her. Because you mattered that much to her. Every single tamal she wrapped and folded and placed in that pot was a sentence in a letter she never knew how to write. Number 3. Arroz con leche, on a random Tuesday. Not a birthday, not a holiday, not any occasion that anyone had marked on a calendar. Just a Tuesday, an ordinary, unremarkable Tuesday when she looked at your face and knew, without you saying a single word, that something was wrong. She didn't ask about it. She didn't push. She didn't sit you down and try to have a conversation you weren't ready for. She went to the kitchen and made arroz con leche. Soft, warm, lightly sweet, the cinnamon exact, the temperature precise enough that it wasn't too hot to eat, but warm enough to mean something. She set it in front of you and she stayed close enough that you knew she was there, and far enough that you didn't have to perform being okay or explain anything or pretend the day hadn't happened. She just stayed. Present, quiet, available. That is a level of emotional intelligence that most people spend decades in therapy trying to develop. She learned it in a kitchen. She practiced it on every ordinary Tuesday that needed saving. She saved more Tuesdays than you ever counted. Number 4. Caldo de pollo. The moment she knew you were sick. You didn't have to tell her. You didn't have to say anything at all. The moment her hand touched your forehead and stayed there 1 second longer than a normal touch, that specific extra second, that paused the pot, was already going on the stove. You heard it before. You understood what it meant. No recipe, no measuring, no looking anything up. Just the movements she had made 150 times before, in that kitchen and in every kitchen before it, the same sequence her mother had taught her and her mother's mother before that. The chicken going in, the onion halved and charred directly on the flame, the garlic. The episode she kept in a glass of water on the windowsill, because she always kept epazote in a glass of water on the windowsill. The heat low and patient. The skimming careful and attentive. The caldo arrived in a bowl that was slightly too full. That was intentional. Full meant there was more where that came from. Full meant you were not going to run out. Full meant she had already decided before she started cooking that you were going to be fine, and the bowl was just the confirmation. She made that decision first. She communicated it through the soup. That is the order it happened in every single time. Number 5. Frijoles de olla on the hardest weeks. There are people who have eaten at 3 Michelin star restaurants, who have spent hundreds of dollars on a single meal, who have traveled to eat food that people write entire books about, and they have never tasted what a pot of frijoles de olla means at the end of a hard week. Not because the beans are rare, not because the technique is complicated, because the meaning cannot be purchased and it cannot be replicated by someone who is not paying attention to you. Beans, water, epazote, salt, thyme, that is the entire ingredient list. But the thyme was everything. She let them go all day on the lowest heat the stove would allow. She checked on them the way you check on someone you love, not intrusively, not making a production of it, just passing by and lifting the lid and making a small adjustment and moving on. By the time evening came, the broth had thickened and darkened, and the beans were soft enough to dissolve against the roof of your mouth, and the whole house smelled like something ancient and patient and entirely sure of itself. That smell was the message. It said, everything is going to be okay. She had decided that in the morning when she put the pot on, and she spent 8 hours communicating it through the smell of beans cooking slowly in a warm kitchen, and by evening you believed it completely because you had been breathing it in all day. Number 6. Tortillas made by hand every single morning. She never used a tortillero. She said the warmth of your hands changes the dough. She said you can feel when it's right, in a way that a press cannot. Whether that is science or faith or simply something she believed with enough conviction to make it true, the tortillas she made with her hands were different from any other tortilla. Everyone who ate them knew it. Nobody could fully explain it. Every morning she made them. Before the day started, before anyone needed anything, before the chaos of the house assembled itself, she was already at the comal. The sound of it, the smell of it, the specific rhythm of palms pressing masa into circles, and the hiss of raw dough hitting a hot surface, that sequence of sounds was the alarm clock of your entire childhood. You didn't need anything else to know that the day was starting, and that someone had already been awake for a while thinking about it before you were. She didn't make tortillas because there was no other option. She made them because store-bought tortillas are not a message. And she had something to say every single morning. She said it with her hands, and 20 minutes before the rest of the house opened its eyes. Number 7. Atole on the first cold morning of the year. He always knew the cold was coming before anyone else. Not from a weather app, not from the news, from something older than both of those things. And on the first genuinely cold morning of the year, the kind of cold that is different from the cold that came before it, the kind that means winter has actually decided to arrive, you came downstairs and the atole was already there. Dark, thick, cinnamon and chocolate and masa and piloncillo made in the clay pot he kept specifically for atole because he said metal changes the flavor, and he was right. The temperature was exactly right, not too hot to hold the cup with both hands, warm enough that the heat traveled up through your palms before you even took a sip. He had timed it. He had thought about how long it would take to cool to the right temperature, and he had started it early enough to account for that, because he was already thinking about your comfort before you were awake to need it. He handed you the cup and went back to whatever he was doing. He didn't make an announcement. He didn't wait to be thanked. What he was saying was, I know it's cold today. I knew before you did, and I already did something about it. Number 8. Chiles rellenos for your birthday instead of cake. She didn't buy a cake. There were bakeries nearby. She knew where they were. The cakes were good and nobody would have complained. But on your birthday, every year, she made chiles rellenos. Because your birthday was the day that deserved the thing that only existed because of her. The poblanos had to be roasted directly over the flame until the skin blistered and blackened completely, then placed in a plastic bag to sweat, then peeled by hand, slowly, carefully, without tearing the flesh. The filling had to be made picadillo, or cheese, or the specific combination you preferred, which she had memorized years ago and never needed to ask about again. The batter had to be exactly right, egg whites beaten to stiff peaks, yolks folded in carefully, the whole thing holding its shape in hot oil without falling apart. The timing had to be perfect so that they arrived at the table hot, not warm, hot, because chiles rellenos at the wrong temperature are a completely different food. She did all of that on the day you were born, because she wanted the meal on your birthday to be something that required her, specifically her, to exist. A cake from a store exists without her. Chiles rellenos on your birthday exist only because she decided you were worth an entire day of her attention. That was the birthday message. Not on a card, on a plate. Number 9. Pozole for the moments that required something more than ordinary food. Pozole was not an everyday food. You understood this as a child without anyone having to explain it. Pozole appeared at illness, at reunion, at grief, at return, at celebration. At the moments when something had shifted and the family needed to gather around something that acknowledged the weight of what had happened. It took time, real time, the kind that cannot be rushed without losing the thing that makes it what it is. The hominy soaking overnight, the pork simmering for hours until it was falling apart. The dried chiles toasted and blended into a sauce that was dark and complex and tasted like something that had been developed over centuries because it had. The garnishes arranged on the table, shredded cabbage, radishes, oregano, lime, tostadas, each one a small act of preparation. Each one saying, I thought about this meal in advance. I planned for it. I wanted it to be complete. When pozole appeared on the table, it meant, this moment is significant. You are significant. I am marking what is happening right now with the best thing I know how to make, because you deserve to have this day remembered and fed properly. Number 10. Pan dulce on Sunday afternoons. The specific weight of the bag from the panaderia. The way it was warm when she handed it to you. The conkers that left a thin film of sugar on your fingers that you licked off without thinking about it. The cuernos that flaked when you bit into them. The polvorones that dissolved before you finished chewing. Sunday afternoons with pan dulce were not a snack. They were a protected hour. The 1 hour of the week when nothing was required of anyone, when there was no urgency, when the pace of the house slowed down to something human, she created that hour. She went to the panaderia, and she came back with a bag, and she put it on the table, and that was the announcement that for the next hour, everyone was allowed to simply exist. She protected that hour every single week. She understood, without ever putting it into words, that her family needs moments of deliberate rest, and she provided them, in a paper bag from the bakery around the corner. Number 11. The specific soup she made only when you came home from far away. It was not the same as the everyday soup. You could taste the difference immediately. The broth was deeper, more careful, built over more time. The ingredients were the ones she didn't use every day, the ones she saved. She had started it the night before, or the morning of, depending on when your bus or your flight arrived, calculating backward from your arrival time to figure out when she needed to begin, so that it would be ready exactly when you walked through the door. You walked in and the smell hit you before anything else, before you saw her face, before you set your bag down. The smell told you that she had known you were coming and she had spent the day preparing for it and she was glad you were back. She didn't say any of that. She said, sit down, it's ready. You sat down, you ate, you felt, without being able to explain it, that you had returned to the exact place in the world where you were most known. Number 12. Sopa de fideos, when the week had been too long. The humblest thing on this list. Fideos, tomato, broth, a few minutes on the stove. Nothing rare, nothing complicated. Nothing that requires skill beyond the skill of having made it so many times that it becomes automatic. And yet there is something about a bowl of sopa de fideos on a Friday evening after a week that took everything you had. Something about the simplicity of it, the warmth of it, the fact that it appeared without you asking for it, that reaches a place inside you that more elaborate food cannot find. She made it with the same attention she gave to everything else. She didn't treat the simple things as less deserving of care. The tomato was blended properly. The fideos were toasted before the liquid went in. The broth was seasoned correctly. She made a simple thing beautifully because she understood something that took you years to understand. Love does not scale with occasion. It is not larger on birthdays and smaller on ordinary Fridays. It is constant. It is the same on a Tuesday in March as it is on Christmas. The only difference is what form it takes.